Hello everybody and welcome to this video. In the winter of 1940, as Britain struggled through the darkest days of the Second World War, two Spitfires and No. 54 Squadron climbed into the cold Yorkshire sky. Their pilots, Flight Lieutenant Alan "Al" Deere, one of the RAF's greatest aces, and a young pilot still learning his craft, Howard Squire. What happened next was a sudden, violent and nearly fatal for both of them. Their mid-air collision should have destroyed them. Instead, it created one of the most remarkable survival stories of the early war and left behind an aircraft that you can still see flying today, Spitfire X4650, sat behind me here. By late 1940, the Battle of Britain had ended, but for frontline squadrons like No. 54 Squadron, the work continued. The unit had been mauled during the summer battles and was now rotating through northern stations such as RAF Catterick, resting, rebuilding and training new pilots. One of those newcomers was Sergeant Howard Squire, keen and competent and enthusiastic, but still mastering the fine controls of formation flying and fighting in a Spitfire. Deere, by contrast, was already a legend. A New Zealander with a fierce competitive streak, he had survived rammings, crashes and bailing out under fire. His memoirs show a man who treated flying almost like a duel. On 28th of December 1940, the two men went up together on what should have been a routine training sortie. Around midday, the pair climbed through roughly 12,000 feet above Kirk Levington in North Yorkshire. Deere's task was simple: demonstrate close formation flying, teach Squire how to hold position, and give him the confidence to fly inches from another Spitfire's tailplane. The Spitfires are pretty sensitive machines, and a tiny misjudgment in closing speeds can shrink a safe distance to zero in a fraction of a second. According to accounts, Squire slid slightly too close. Perhaps an updraft caught him, perhaps his eyes flicked to an instrument for just a moment. Deere later wrote that he sensed it more than saw. Squire's propeller struck the tail of Deere's Spitfire X4276. Deere's tailplane was shredded. The aircraft began to vibrate and wallow. Squire's Spitfire X4650 took an even worse punch. The sudden impact lightly tore through his structure and control surfaces, leaving it almost impossible to hold straight. Imagine the shock: one moment training, the next your aircraft shaking apart above a frozen countryside. Both men were forced into emergency responses. Deere wrestled his crippled fighter, eventually managing to bail out before his aircraft came down near Town End Farm, famously landing in or near what locals described as a cesspit. Squire, in X4650, was fighting a losing battle. With his aircraft barely controllable, he went down near the River Leven. Remarkably, he survived. Spitfire X4650 was written off on the spot. The airframe lay broken in the Yorkshire mud, another early war aircraft lost to the hazards of training rather than enemy action. And there X4650 remained, buried, forgotten, for decades. But the story wasn't over. In later years, the wreck was recovered, and restoration experts realised they had rediscovered a rare early production Mark I Spitfire, one of the machines that had formed the backbone of Britain's survival in 1940. After years of painstaking work, X4650 returned to the skies. The aircraft you see in these shots not only flies, it carries the scars of a moment when two lives nearly ended. Howard Squire survived the crash and continued serving. Although lesser known than the famous aces, his experience was typical of hundreds of young RAF pilots who risked their lives in training as much as in combat. Al Deere survived too, of course, going on to become one of the greatest RAF pilots of the war. His autobiography, 9 Lives, a highly recommended book, recounts a collision with characteristic understatement. For him, it was one more brush with death in a career full of them. The mid-air collision of 28th of December 1940 is more than just a footnote in RAF history. It illustrates the daily dangers pilots faced, even far from enemy attack. Training claimed hundreds of aircraft and many lives. One of those lives would be my great-uncle, George Atkinson, a Battle of France and Battle of Britain veteran. He was killed on the 1st of March 1945 while instructing a student in a Mosquito. Watch out for a video on George in the near future. Yet from that accident came two remarkable survivors, X4650 and X4276, Deere's aircraft, both rebuilt or being rebuilt against all odds by the Biggin Hill-based Spitfire company. 4650 now flying as a living reminder of the men who learned, fought, and too often died in the skies in the 1940s. From a violent mid-air collision to its resurrection decades later, Spitfire X4650 represents both the fragility and durability of history. Every rivet, every panel tells a story of pilots like Howard Squire learning their craft, and aces like Al Deere surviving yet another improbably close call. If you've enjoyed the look into the history behind X4650, please like, comment and subscribe. And if you've ever seen this aircraft fly in person, tell us all about it in the comments below. Thank you very much for your time. See you again soon.